Now, one person we did hear from today for the first time, Karen Reed herself, doubling down, of course, saying she did not do this. She wants to know who did.
Said it feels we're the only ones fighting for the truth of what happened to John O'Keefe. And me and my family and my attorneys and my team have marshaled every resource to get to the truth. It just feels like no one else wants it.
Karen, just to be clear, you didn't do it.
We know who did it, Steve. We know. And we know who spearheaded this cover-up. You all know.
Yes, we do.
And no, she didn't do it. No, she didn't do it. This is an innocent woman. She didn't do it.
I tried to save his life.
Yeah.
I tried to save his life at 6 in the morning. I was covered in the only one trying to save his life.
Why'd you admit to it?
She didn't admit to it. She didn't admit to anything close to that. Nothing close to that. And you should know that.
That was like 3 or 4 times she admitted to it.
No, she didn't.
That's not true.
She asked a question. She asked a question, which is very different. She didn't admit to anything.
You are listening to the Roberta Glass True Crime Report, putting the true back in true crime. From New York City, Roberta Glass is now on the record.
Okay. How is everybody? Today, I want to talk about Karen Reed and her close-up moment in Vanity Fair and really look at who's behind it. So there's a writer named Julie Miller, and I wanted to look at her background today and talk about some of the innocence fraud tactics that she uses and really explore or explain why I think she is a innocence fraudster. So if you are new here or if you haven't heard me talk about innocence fraud before, innocence fraud is usually used to describe a campaign post-conviction. In this case, where someone campaigns for a guilty person's release from prison and trying to make it look like they're an innocent person who was convicted unjustly. And they will use documentaries, books, magazine articles to further that narrative. And they will use just plain old fraud upon the court. Adnan Syed is a good example where nobody had heard of Heyman Lee's killer, Adnan Syed, until the Serial podcast, until Sarah Koenig showed up. And we're hearing about this guy totally through her loving eyes. I mean, his eyes look like a cow's. He seems like such a nice guy. And through the convicted killer's words himself. Making a Murderer is another example where we saw Stephen Avery's conviction for the murder of Theresa Halbach, along with his nephew, Brendan Dassey, presented to the public as a frame-up and a wrongful conviction, combined with a huge conspiracy story. And the West Memphis Three is another example of that with their Paradise Lost series. So to make it look like Damien Eccles et al. Were convicted for the murder of 3 8-year-old boys because they wore black t-shirts and listened to Metallica. So this is unusual in that it is such a public campaign, way ahead of a trial. So this started way before the trial, almost immediately. And it was orchestrated by Karen Reed, her well-moneyed lawyers, to throw out conspiracy theories and untrue news items, made up stories to a blogger, Aidan Carney, otherwise known as Turtle Boy, who disseminated it and made it feel true. Also, another thing that Karen Reed did was that through her contacts, she got a federal investigation to cement this untrue story, to make it look like there was corruption going on. So in any kind of fraud, it's to make something untrue look true, or make something look like it's not what it really is. So they only really work on the surface. And once you delve further into it, you realize that it's you're only hearing maybe some little parts of it are true, but the context and the larger facts within it are missing. And another thing that they do is to put the killer center stage and really obscure the victim and their family. Because as I've said so many times on this podcast, the victim's family's voice are really very powerful. So we all come at these things with the same morality, or we think we have the same morality. It would be very hard to say, you know, hey, I'm campaigning for a guy that killed 3 children. I want to get this guilty killer out. No, you have to say, here's a victim of an injustice. You're doing a good thing. So it's using the same kind of morality. The victim is really here. But in true crime, unlike maybe some other things, you cannot sympathize with both or you can't advocate for, and really can't sympathize, I believe, with the killer and the victim at the same time. So you have to pick a side in these true crime stories. And so often what's become popular in true crime media is to focus on the killer, focus on the killer's family and the killer's discomfort and journey through our legal system and how unfair it's been. So I was listening to some of the things on the Delphi case on Hidden True Crime, and the woman's talking about how he was given an extra blanket and how she's so glad he was given all these extra amenities in jail. Richard Allen, the accused killer of Abby and Libby. Right? And just like, well, why was that good? Why do you care whether he got an extra blanket or not? You know, it's just interesting. It's just everywhere. So I want to start out. Last time we met, yesterday, we were talking about Karen Reed. So I'm going to start off with your comments and then we'll dive right into it.
We got you coming. You had something to say. You were insightful. Oh, so clever. So Roberta's going to read your comments. Hey, Roberta, read those comments.
Barb 417 says Karen Reed wants to know who did this. So she's referring to the opening, which I love, We all know who did this. I've marshaled every resource. So she doesn't say no. And so her lawyer, Alan Jackson, has to jump in and say, oh, no, she didn't do this. Because the press is all waiting for her to say, I didn't do this, which is the reflexive reaction of any innocent person. And Alan Jackson recognizes it immediately. It jumps to, oh, no, she didn't do this. She didn't do this. Gets real dramatic. She didn't do this. Didn't you say on the courthouse steps, we know who did this? We know who spearheaded this. We are still waiting for Karen to tell us who the boogeyman is. Right? Well, great point, Barb. It depends. It's just the McAlberts. It's the vague McAlberts. Don't ask how they did it. Don't ask why Karen Reed's taillight was in pieces way before she did that 507 love tap on John O'Keefe's car. Don't talk about that. Just some kind of vague conspiracy, how they were able to bring out, why a police officer would want to dump John O'Keefe's body in their front lawn. That's the best place to hide a body, in the front lawn, right? Or any of the other illogical things. Like they couldn't plant evidence because the car was way on the way to the Sally Port. As the officers were getting there. So, I mean, what are we talking about here? Kind of falls apart. It's just sort of like this vague conspiracy theory. Like the free Karen readers will never put the whole thing together. Ask them exactly what happened and they'll go, well, it's not my job to solve this. I'm not a detective. But their alternate story, and this is the same with Adnan Syed or any of the other innocence fraud narratives that I talk about, does not make any sense from beginning to end. Tell me your alternative theory from beginning to end, free Karen readers. Tell me how it happened. Was it Colin Albert? Was it who else? It seems odd when, tell me exactly how it happened and why. And then the dog just jumped in on it too. It was Chloe the dog and all of them. But it's being sold by people like Julie Miller in Vanity Fair magazine. Badass Cass says, are you even in reality? Wow. How can anyone think that she is guilty and there is no corruption in the Norfolk DA's office is disturbing. What is the corruption exactly? What corruption are you talking about? See, these kind of points, they don't really have to, it's really not arguing or supporting an argument. It's just saying, wow. This was the closest I got from the free Karen readers to actually making an argument. I had things like, she's innocent. I was like, well, if you said it in the comments, what a compelling argument you make. You clearly don't know about the case. So it's an insult with a vague allegation of corruption and another tied in with another insult that I'm not in reality. And then a kind of a call for conformity, like how can anyone think she's guilty? Meaning all the rest of us think, all the sane people think she's innocent. What's wrong with you? Okay, badass Cass. Angel Prissy says, you are all one-sided, lady. Many have some share of responsibility for what went down, including John O'Keefe, the victim. Okay. Straight, boldly victim blaming himself. Law enforcement and the prosecution and court need to be held accountable for their shady business too. Okay, here's another vague claim of corruption or misdoings. Bunch of drunk old hypocrites. Okay, there's another unsupported allegation. Weird article in Vanity Fair. I don't know if I describe it as weird, but yeah, okay. But convictions need to happen on facts, not shady bias, nor by hiding phones, nor by lying. Okay, well, there's two things. Okay, hold on. I'm going to read the whole thing and then I'll go through it. Questions and doubts haven't been covered up as some hoped. So bring in another jury and hopefully an actual judge and prosecutor and less showy Jackson stuff. Okay. So, but convictions need to happen on facts, not shady bias. So two things are happening here. This podcast is not a courtroom. I'm not a juror. I'm allowed to have an opinion based on the evidence that I've looked at. So yeah, no convictions are happening here. I'm giving my opinion based on the facts of the case. Nor by hiding phones, nor by lying. I think you're talking about someone throwing away their phones. Certainly a lot of data was extracted from Higgins' phone, nor by lying. Okay, I don't know who you think is lying, so it's vague. I can't answer that. Questions and doubts haven't been covered up as some hoped. Okay, I thought it was pretty well proved in the first trial, but okay, obviously not. I don't know who was on the jury or what their issues were. I wasn't in the deliberation, so I can't tell you. All right. Getting to what I'm talking about today. Karen Reed. Okay, so wanted to talk about Julie Miller, who wrote this article, 2-part article about Karen Reed. Here she is. She's been writing articles for Vanity Fair for over a decade. And she also writes articles which were on famous people, covering, say, I don't know, movie stars and such. So it was interesting that she took this approach to covering Karen Reed, which is sometimes if you're doing a article about a movie star, you might spend the day with them. But what is the most unusual thing about this article, and it's being called unusual or unorthodox because journalists are supposed to keep a distance and have an objective view of what they're covering. And it's very interesting that the Free Karen readers who constantly call me biased because I have an opinion different than theirs are not calling Julie Miller biased for moving in with Karen Reed for 3 days and bunking up with her. Julie Miller even talks about being pregnant and having her family worried for her moving in with an accused criminal, not an accused murderer. So already you have to pay attention to the language used. It gives you quite a different feeling. And people only respond to what's in front of them, what's put in front of them. So here we have her moving in with an accused criminal, not an accused murderer, little bit. And she says she brought her own groceries, which I thought was a weird fact. Like, you're already moving in with Karen Reed. You think that having your own Greek yogurt in the fridge is going to keep objectivity? It's so odd, but okay. And her background is she not only writes about these movie stars and famous people, but she also covers true crime, but it seems to be always from the perspective of the convicted and with a real sympathy for convicted killers. So first off, she wrote an article about Michael Peterson, who was accused of killing 2 women who were found at the bottom of the staircase. He was convicted for killing one, his wife, Kathleen Peterson, but he was accused in that trial of killing Elizabeth Ratliff, who was the mother of the children that, I don't know if he ever fully adopted them, but he certainly cared for them like they call him dad. I don't know if they fully went through the adoption. And here's her article, The Staircase for Michael Peterson and Daughter Margaret, The Nightmare Continues with HBO Max. So, and it goes on to say, Peterson and Margaret Ratliff feel that their family tragedy was perverted for profit with HBO's dramatized adaptation of The Staircase. So if you don't know about The Staircase, it's done by a French filmmaker, and he embedded himself with the defense. The defense welcomed him in. And the whole documentary is the defense. It starts with the murder and goes behind the scenes of Michael Peterson's defense. He is getting acting lessons when he's considering taking the stand. I mean, the only thing I can say is acting lessons. It's a guy who's written a lot about taking the stand and appearing well before juries. I think that's one of the most fascinating scenes. You can see them constructing their defense, the defense team, with good fact, bad fact. They get a mock jury to look at Henry Lee as their expert witness. So he had a $1 million plus defense, I believe. And it's all filmed in The Staircase, but HBO came along. So what happened with The Staircase is he eventually gets convicted. So, and they leave out a lot of evidence, really very damning evidence against Michael Peterson. For one, the fractures of the throat fractures and the red neurons in Kathleen Peterson's blood are totally left out. In favor of leaving this doubt. Did he do it? Didn't he do it? So you're to think at the end that when he's convicted, it's a huge travesty of justice. And eventually his conviction is overturned due to Dwayne Deaver, the blood expert, overstated how many times he testified about blood in murder trials. So he got it overturned for that reason. And they were looking to retry him. And eventually he pled guilty, legally a guilty plea via an Alford plea. So what an Alford plea means that you can still maintain your innocence, but you admit the state had enough evidence to convict you, but it's legally a guilty plea. So he pleaded guilty to a lesser charge like manslaughter and took responsibility for his wife's murder. So when the HBO dramatized series came out, there was a lot of information about Michael Peterson and his shady ways. So in The Staircase, he's been presented as like the father of the year. I would never do this. You find out about how he robbed his neighbors, or all the affairs, the amount of gay affairs he was having, or gay, or just, I don't know, hookups, you could call it. under his wife's nose. And he, of course, said his wife knew about his gay affairs, etc. My brother put it best. He said, this guy had more skeletons in his closet. He's like, it's not normal. He's got to be guilty. He has more skeletons in his closet. Anyway, so here's Julie Miller concentrating on or amplifying Michael Peterson and his daughters, who I believe is brainwashed, Margaret. I think the younger one seems to be. It's interesting she's not in this. Seems to be waking up to reality. And Kathleen Peterson's daughter believes that from another marriage, believes he's totally guilty. Here, Julie Miller is concentrating on Michael Peterson and his daughter's pain due to this HBO dramatic series. Give me a break. But if that doesn't give you an idea about here she is talking about a woman who was kidnapped in a Kmart parking lot by a serial killer and a serial assaulter of women. I'll put it that way. You can read between the lines. In Texas in 1981. And so he kidnapped her by gunpoint, this serial killer, and made Margie drive him to a bus station. But this article I found the most interesting in that it paints the serial killer, talks about his abuse in his childhood, about how the psychiatrist found him very charming. And psychopaths are very charming. According to Wikipedia, and I know that's not always the best source, but I have not done a deep dive into this man's murders. Wikipedia says that he killed at least 40 girls and women and 7 men, so 47 people. But interestingly, Julie Miller caps off his murders or she writes about them in the way 30, more than 30 murders. So I guess you could do more than 10 and it's 47. Yeah, 47 is more than 10. So she's off by 17, but okay, says Wikipedia. But there's a more interesting part of this article so who needs to talk to the victim's family members when you can talk to a woman who befriended this killer? So this woman befriended her kidnapper, this psychopathic murderer, from behind bars as he's waiting execution. Not only that, her mother befriended him too. And there's one very interesting moment in that writing when she writes, let me get the quote exactly correct. She writes, she speaks to another woman who was let go or allowed to live from this killer, let her go. And she writes, I think she quotes this one lucky survivor as saying, I think he let me live because I showed him compassion. Meaning the 47 the people who were murdered by this man just lacked compassion for their killer. Boo. Boo murder victims, right? How intolerant of them not to show compassion for their killer. So really interesting. So her focus seems to be entirely on being sympathetic to murderers and their feelings, and totally ghosting victims. This is the kind of victim that she likes, that brings out the humanity in a killer, that doesn't want to see justice done.
So can I
So it's just unbelievable. But if that doesn't prove that where her focus is, here's an article that Julie Miller wrote on Ted Bundy's longtime girlfriend finally speaks. I mean, who wants to talk to victims' families, members, when you can do a love story about Ted Bundy and his girlfriend, right? It's another one, because serial killers are so fascinating, aren't they? Also, she's talked about the Menendez brothers, and she has talked about the new faux documentary about the Menendez brothers. And that's an advocacy piece in order to get them out. It seems to have worked. And their pain, it's titled Inside Netflix, The Menendez Brothers and Lyle and Eric's Complicated Feelings, because killers have such complicated feelings, don't they? It's complicated about their parents. So totally taking the Eric and Lyle's word for fact and putting out the phony narrative that they killed their parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez, in August of 1989 because they were abused. Eric was 18 at the time, Lyle was 21. So Julie Miller is continuing the narrative that they did this because they were abused, not because they were going to be disinherited. And they were greedy, and that they planned out the murder meticulously, buying the guns, etc. Even hiring a computer expert to wipe Jose Menendez's computer clean from a file where they felt the new will was. They also broke into a safe looking for this new will. And they spent what would be in today's money $1.78 million of their parents' money within months of the murder. But here's Julie Miller furthering the narrative that got the Menendez brothers out, the innocence fraud narrative that is looking like it might work in getting the Menendez brothers out. But if that's not enough, she also covered the friendship between the Menendez brothers and O.J. Simpson. Because who doesn't want to read about Nicole Simpson and Ron Goldman's killer making friends with Kitty and Jose Menendez's killers, their sons, Eric and Lyle Menendez? Who doesn't want to read about that? Who doesn't want to read about that bromance behind bars? Julie Miller's got you covered. So can see that her interest is entirely with killers, sympathizing them, and getting them out of prison with her writing. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, if you have any questions, just shoot them up. Use the tool. So this is what we talk about when we talk about propaganda. So I wanted to look at how propaganda is put together. This is a pretty interesting article. So all innocence fraud is propaganda, essentially. And this was a article written by Noam Spencer titled "The Con of Propaganda to Avoid Being Manipulated by Propaganda." And here are some of the things that they use. He writes, if you can't find the sucker at the poker table, goes the saying, you're it. I like that saying too. Extrapolating the axiom to the present political moment, we may say, if you didn't hear much about propaganda, that's what you're hearing. The term propaganda goes into its origins, but I really want to get down to some of the techniques. So name calling, labeling in today's lingo. This basic technique amounts to propaganda 101. How about corrupt cops? How right? How about corruption? How about unfair trial without ever having to explain it? If you want to hurt someone, diminish their standing, intimidate them, or provoke them, or perhaps create a harassment campaign to the witnesses and the victim's family. Boo them as they come into court. Give them nicknames like the McAlberts, Crooked, Tiny Hands, okay? If you want to hurt someone, diminish their standing, intimidate them, or provoke them into ill-considered action, call them a bad name, crooked, tiny hands, bad names, according to IPA, have ruined reputations, stirred men and women to outstanding accomplishments. That's another thing the Free Karen readers will do, is they're always looking to embarrass those on the other side, or to embarrass witnesses, or to go on a fishing expedition, which they did successfully on Trooper Proctor's phone through the federal investigation, and to find his private text messages where he wrote inappropriate text messages about Karen Read and call him crooked or corrupt. When, as far as I know, he has a very clean record. Sent others to prison cells. Okay, wait, hold on. Bad names, according to IPA, have ruined reputations, stirred men and women to outstanding accomplishments, sent others to prison cells, and made men mad enough to enter battle and slaughter their fellow men. Right. Or meaning, if you want to also provoke someone into bad action, which is something you see Turtle Boy doing, showing up at the Albert's Pizza Parlor and provoking someone on the other side into an altercation and filming it, which makes them look bad. Glittering generalities is another technique. This technique takes big virtue words to which many people are emotionally connected and attaches them to the ends favored by the propagandist. Make American great, hope and change. If you notice, these innocence fraud campaigns always use justice, right? We're trying to get justice for John O'Keefe. The other side has taken that. You'll see Justice use the Truth and Justice podcast, which is, I don't think Bob Ruff in that podcast has ever met a murderer he doesn't want to free. And they always paint themselves as doing the right thing, right? Crusading, making a right, righting a wrong, doing something great, standing up to big government, right? Or our big legal system. Transfer is a device by which the propagandist seeks to transfer onto him and his cause the esteem and respect we have for someone else, i.e. using John O'Keefe's name. It's a way to bask in someone else's reflective glory, to have another's legitimacy. This is also the way that they use experts. So one of the things that Julie Miller says in this article is that she found an expert that agrees with Karen Read's computer expert. So meaning that the How Long to Die in the Cold lookup by Jen McCabe wasn't at the request of Karen Read, as Jen McCabe has testified but it was done it wasn't done in the morning at her request. It was done at 2:27 a.m., meaning something nefarious was going on after the group of them murdered him. And so that's something that Julie Miller used. It's something that Karen Read uses. Experts. Testimonials. It's frequently used in marketing and advertisement. Propagandists will use testimonials to legitimize a position. And this is a really interesting technique. Plain folks. This technique takes advantage of the human ability and desire to identify with like others. So this is a device used by politicians, labor leaders, and businessmen. So in Julie Miller's article, Karen Reed is presented as just a falsely accused woman up against the system, going broke, defending herself. Right? Someone someone just like us, someone struggling through life, someone you'd want to help. Card stacking is this is another technique, is what we may these days call hyping. It's full course PR press. The propagandist employs all the art of deception to win our support for himself, his group, nation, race, policy, practice, or belief, or ideal. He stacks the card against the truth. He uses underemphasis and overemphasis to dodge issues and evade facts, right? So you diminish the horror of the crime, you obscure the victims and the victim's family altogether, and you make the hero of the story Karen Reed. That is done over and over and over and over again. So no longer is the victim the person who was murdered. The victim is now the murderer, and the murder victim is totally forgotten, and their family and the horror of it is totally diminished. He creates a smokescreen of clamor by raising a new issue when he wants to embrace his matters forgotten. He draws a red herring across the trail to confuse and divert those in a quest for facts, like I would call the red herring the 227 phone search, or maybe you could call it the entire investigation. He does not want, the investigation done by the feds, the federal investigation is what I mean. He makes the unreal appear real and the real appear unreal. He lets half-truths masquerade as truth. And that's the most important technique. So one of the things they do, omit facts. So now the entire case is the taillight. So it's much easier to get people to question one facts than the totality of the evidence. So for instance, Karen Reed's beeping car info system that night, which would be, I believe, flashing red and beeping at her as she's going 24 hours in reverse, never touching her brake. There's also the DNA on Karen Reed's taillight, on the back of her car, of John O'Keefe. There's John O'Keefe's hair found on the back of Karen Reed's car. There's the glass embedded and pieces of taillight embedded in John O'Keefe's shirt. There's a ton of evidence. There's Karen Reed's own statement. And there's the very damning statements of all the first responders and Jennifer and Matt McCabe, who said Karen Reed told me that, and Karen Reed's father, who all said Karen Reed said I hit him, some variation of I hit him. Did I hit, did I hit him? I hit him. Is he dead? I hit him. My taillight is all busted up. She called way before 5:07 a.m. and talked to Jennifer McCabe and Matt McCabe and said, I busted up my taillight. She made the statement that he was dead and she knew right where he was. So there's that bandwagoning. And of course, there's the feeling that you want to jump on the bandwagon. So the free Karen readers will constantly point out that you're in the minority, or that you're such a loser, you have such few followers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just a little bit of the techniques that are used in propaganda and are used by Julie Miller. I just wanted to do a quickie today. If nobody has any questions, I don't see any. Hang out for a second. I'm going to take a quick break. When I come back, if you have any questions, I'll answer them. Otherwise, we'll call it a night. I'll be back in 1 minute. Don't go anywhere.
A glass of wine. Roberta will be back in no time. This podcast is listener supported, so smash that like button and subscribe, or become a patron for exclusive content if you are so inclined. Have something to say? Shoot Roberta a super chat. She will do her best to read it on air without delay. Now Roberta's back and ready to put the true back in true crime. Here's Roberta.
All right. So that is just some of the background of Julie Miller. So if you're surprised as to why it is so pro Karen Reed, it is one in a long line of pro killer articles, innocence fraud articles that she has read. I hope you have a better sense of how innocence fraud narratives are put together. Certainly, we all have, it's very hard would be very hard for Karen Reed to say, I'm a guilty killer and I need money for my defense. Instead, she's saying, I have carpet from the house. I just need it tested to fund my defense. Hey, 65 CJ5. Thanks for the super sticker. Is that from Australia? So that is what I have for today. Have a great night, everyone. And I'm off tomorrow, but I will see you Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern. Happy Halloween. Stay safe. Thanks for listening.
I hit my boyfriend with my car. It wasn't an accident. But with lying lawyers, I'll go far. Lying lawyers and witness harassment, I'll avoid prison. It was snowing. I pushed the pedal down, hit him hard. Now the legal system a clown. Innocence fraud campaign to save my skin. Making money, truth is my second victim. Carry, Jen, like John, you were my mom. My innocence fraud campaign is my biggest hit yet. I hit my boyfriend with my car. It wasn't an accident, but with lying lawyers I'll go far. Lying lawyers and witness harassment, I'll avoid prison. It was snowing. I pushed the pedal down, hit him hard. Now the legal system a clown. Innocence fraud campaign to save my skin. Making money, truth is my son.